I used to think the awkward part would be seeing Maya again after the night of the storm. What I had not expected was how quickly I would begin inventing reasons to see her again. 3 days after I woke beneath her blanket, I stepped into the elevator and found her already inside, holding a paper grocery bag against one hip. For half a second, neither of us spoke. That was unusual for me because silence had always been my strongest skill. Maya looked at me, and the corner of her mouth lifted. "Morning, neighbor." "Good morning." I pressed the button for the lobby even though it was already glowing. Maya noticed. Of course she noticed. "You know," she said. "Pressing it twice does not make the elevator faster." I was confirming someone had made the correct decision. That sounds exhausting. Competence often is. She laughed, and something in my chest loosened before I could object. Then her eyes settled on me with that quiet amusement I had begun to recognize. "So," she said, "still hate me?" I stared at the closing numbers above the door. "I have downgraded you from intolerable to occasionally manageable. That is practically affection coming from you." The elevator doors opened before I had to answer. Maya walked backward for 2 steps, smiling at me. "Have a good day, Claire." She said my name casually, but I carried the sound of it through the lobby and halfway to my car. That annoyed me more than it should have. By evening, I had almost convinced myself the encounter meant nothing. Almost. I made dinner, poured 1 glass of wine, and opened the novel I had been reading before the storm. At 7:30, footsteps passed in the hallway. I knew immediately they were not hers. At 8:12, the elevator chimed. I looked toward my front door before catching myself. "Ridiculous," I said aloud. My apartment offered no argument. Then at 8:40 there were 3 soft knocks. Not loud. Not urgent. Somehow unmistakably Maya. I remained seated for perhaps 2 seconds longer than necessary, purely on principle, then opened the door. Maya stood there holding a small hardcover book. "You left this at my place." I recognized it immediately. I had apparently abandoned it on her side table the morning after the storm. I wondered where that went. "Did you?" Her smile suggested she doubted me. "Eventually." She handed it over, but neither of us moved. The exchange should have ended there. Book returned. Neighbor thanked. Door closed. Instead Maya glanced past me, not intrusively, merely curious. "So this is the famous fortress." I raised an eyebrow. "Famous?" I have spent months living 6 inches of drywall away from it. And somehow survived. Barely. I should have said good night. Instead I heard myself ask, "Would you like a glass of wine?" Maya blinked once, and for the first time since I had known her, I had managed to surprise her. Then she smiled. "I thought you would never ask." I stepped aside and opened the door wider, suddenly aware that no storm was forcing either of us to do this. Maya crossed the threshold slowly, and I discovered that watching someone enter your home by invitation feels very different from hearing them exist on the other side of a wall. She paused just inside, taking in the cream walls, the dark wood furniture, the books arranged by subject, and the kitchen counters with precisely nothing on them that did not belong there. "Wow," she said. I closed the door. That sounded judgmental. I was going to say peaceful. You hesitated. I was choosing the diplomatic word. She walked toward the living room, careful not to touch anything, which I noticed because I had expected her to wander through my space with the same cheerful disregard I once imagined she brought to everything. Instead, she waited until I gestured toward the sofa before sitting. "It looks exactly like you," she said. I am uncertain whether that is a compliment. Everything knows where it belongs. I carried 2 wine glasses from the kitchen. Unlike your apartment, where your mail appears to be conducting an independent occupation of the dining table. Maya laughed. "You noticed my mail?" It was difficult not to. "Interesting." I stopped pouring. "Do not make that face." "What face?" "The one suggesting you have discovered evidence." "I am just enjoying how observant you are for someone who spent months pretending I barely existed." I handed her a glass. "You were loud. Observation was unavoidable. There she is." We touched glasses lightly, and somehow the old complaint had become a private joke. That should have felt strange. Instead it felt easy. We talked about ordinary things. The building. The weather. A restaurant Maya insisted had the best tacos within 5 miles, and that I had apparently committed a serious cultural offense by never visiting. 10 minutes became 30. At some point, Maya noticed the record player beside my bookshelf. "You own vinyl? Some of us survived music before streaming." She looked genuinely delighted. "Play something." "Absolutely not. You have already inflicted enough music on this floor." "That sounds like fear, Claire." "Of your taste?" "Certainly. I chose an old soul record anyway." Maya leaned back and listened without making a joke. That surprised me. More surprising was the way she closed her eyes for a few seconds, simply letting the song fill the room. When she opened them, her expression had softened. "My dad used to play music like this on Sunday mornings," she said. Then she smiled as though she had revealed slightly more than intended. I did not ask for the rest of the story. Not yet. When the record ended, Maya glanced at the time and stood. "I should let you have your fortress back." I walked her to the door, unexpectedly reluctant to end an evening that had never been planned. She stepped into the hallway, then turned. "Thank you for the wine. Thank you for returning my book. That was definitely the only reason I came over." She held my gaze for one quiet second, amused. Then she disappeared behind her own door. I looked down at the book in my hand and realized I had never once opened it. The next knock came 4 evenings later, and by then I had already learned something inconvenient about anticipation. Once you start listening for a particular sound, every other sound becomes an interruption. I was slicing vegetables when Maya appeared with a paper container in one hand. "I made too much," she said. "That container appears suspiciously deliberate. Are you accusing me of premeditated pasta?" "I am considering it." She smiled. "Then I should probably take it back." I moved aside before she could. That would be wasteful. It became our first excuse that neither of us respected enough to examine. The following week, I returned the container with lemon cookies inside. Maya stared at them. "Did you bake these?" "Do not sound so alarmed. I thought your kitchen was decorative." "Leave. After I eat one." She ate 3. 2 nights later, I heard a knock and opened the door to find her holding her phone. "One song," she said. 4 minutes. Your estimates have historically been unreliable. 3 minutes and 42 seconds. I should have remained at the doorway. Instead, I let her in. 40 minutes later, she was sitting at my kitchen counter while I finished making tea, explaining why the song deserved another chance. "The problem," I told her, "is that the singer appears to be having an argument with the microphone." Maya laughed so suddenly she nearly spilled her tea. "You are impossible. And yet you keep knocking." The words escaped before I considered them. For one small beat, Maya became quiet. Then her expression softened. "You keep opening the door." I turned toward the cabinet, pretending the mugs required my complete attention. There were 8 of them, all perfectly serviceable, but Maya had begun choosing the same one every time. A deep blue ceramic mug with a slightly uneven handle. I had never particularly cared for it. Somehow, I had started reaching for it before she asked. That realization bothered me enough that I deliberately handed her a white mug instead. Maya looked at it, then at me. "What happened to my blue one?" "Your blue one. You know. My mug." "It is my mug." "That sounds like something a landlord would say." I surrendered and exchanged it. "You have been here approximately 4 times. 5. I stared at her. She smiled over the rim. "Not that anyone is counting." Apparently someone was. The visits continued, though neither of us called them visits anymore. Sometimes I crossed the hallway carrying half a bottle of wine because Maya had mentioned making dinner. Sometimes she arrived with dessert and no explanation at all. One Saturday afternoon I realized the novel I wanted was still on Maya's coffee table from 2 nights earlier. I stood outside her door preparing to knock, then stopped. There was no storm. No forgotten book being returned. No extra food in my hands. Nothing respectable enough to disguise what I wanted. I simply wanted to see her. Before I could decide whether that qualified as a reason, Maya opened the door from the other side. She looked at my empty hands, then up at me. "Claire." I had never felt so conspicuous in a hallway. "I believe you have my book." Maya's smile arrived slowly. "Of course I do." She stepped aside, leaving the door open. And this time, Neither of us pretended the book was the important part. After that afternoon, the excuses became almost embarrassingly thin. A missing book could justify one visit. A borrowed container might justify another. But there was no reasonable explanation for Maya appearing at my door on Tuesday holding half a loaf of bread and announcing, "I bought too much." I looked at the loaf. Did the bakery force you? They are very persuasive. Clearly. I opened the door anyway. By Thursday, I was carrying a bottle of wine across the hallway, because Maya had texted that she was attempting a new recipe. Attempting turned out to be the correct word. "It is supposed to look like that," she said, staring into the skillet. "Nothing is supposed to look like that. You have no imagination. I have functioning eyesight." We ordered takeout and ate her failed experiment only long enough to establish that neither of us was brave enough to finish it. A week became 2. 2 became 3. The rhythm formed so quietly that I could not identify the moment it became a rhythm. Some evenings Maya knocked. Other evenings I did. Sometimes she arrived carrying dinner. Sometimes I opened a bottle of wine. Once she knocked simply to ask whether I had seen the sunset from my windows because, according to her, the clouds looked ridiculously dramatic. I informed her that clouds were incapable of being ridiculous. Then I stood beside her at my window for 15 minutes watching them turn orange over the city. The blue mug stopped being one of my mugs. It became Maya's. I never announced this. I simply began taking it from the cabinet whenever I heard her knock. One evening she noticed it already waiting beside the coffee maker. "You prepared my mug." "I prepared a mug." "My mug." "Your confidence remains concerning." She wrapped both hands around it, smiling, and I discovered that being teased about something was considerably more dangerous when the accusation was true. My belongings began migrating in the opposite direction. A novel remained on Maya's nightstand after I lent it to her. A scarf I removed during dinner stayed over the back of one of her chairs for almost a week. Neither of us seemed particularly motivated to return anything quickly. The strangest change, however, was not what accumulated in our apartments. It was what disappeared between them. The hallway became shorter somehow. Knocking became less ceremonial. Silence stopped requiring explanation. One Sunday Maya stretched across my sofa while I read in the armchair. Nearly 20 minutes passed without either of us speaking. Her phone rested face down on her stomach. Rain tapped softly against the windows. I turned a page and realized I had not felt responsible for entertaining her. More unsettlingly, I had not felt that she was disturbing me. Maya looked over. "What?" "Nothing. You are staring." "I was thinking." "Dangerous." I returned to my book. She smiled and closed her eyes. I read the same paragraph twice before understanding what had changed. For years peace had meant being alone. Yet there I was, listening to another person breathe 6 feet away. And my apartment had never felt quieter. Then Maya's phone chimed. She sat up, checked the screen and smiled at whatever she saw. "I have to go." The disappointment arrived before I could stop it. I covered it with the oldest defense I had. "At last. I was beginning to wonder whether you had moved in." Maya stood, picked up her coat, then glanced toward the blue mug still on my table. "Careful, Claire. You might miss me." I gave her a look meant to dismiss the idea. The problem was that, by then, I was no longer entirely certain it was an idea I could dismiss. The next time Maya mentioned music, she did it with the confidence of someone who had already decided resistance was temporary. She was standing in my kitchen, eating strawberries from a bowl while I prepared dinner, when a song began playing softly from her phone. "You know this one," she said. "I know many things." That was not an answer. I listened for several seconds and recognized the melody from the months when her music had traveled through our shared wall. "Unfortunately, yes." Maya smiled. "You like it." Recognition and approval are entirely different concepts. You were tapping your knife against the cutting board. I looked down. Apparently I had been keeping time. Coincidence? Of course. The following morning, a message arrived from Maya containing a playlist. She had named it Musical Rehabilitation for Claire, which I considered unnecessarily provocative. I replied that rehabilitation implied an injury. She answered that my taste in music qualified. I did not open the playlist until that evening. That detail mattered to me then, as though waiting several hours proved something. I poured a glass of wine, sat on the sofa, and pressed play with the detached curiosity of a person conducting research. The first song was irritatingly good. The second was too loud. I skipped the third after 30 seconds, returned to it 5 minutes later, and discovered I had judged it prematurely. By the sixth song, my book was lying unopened beside me. There were older songs mixed among the newer ones, including one from the record I had played for Maya during her first evening in my apartment. I stared at my phone when it began. That was Maya, I realized. Not simply giving me her music, but listening closely enough to make room for mine. 2 mornings later, I was making coffee when I caught myself humming one of the songs. 3 knocks interrupted me. Maya entered after I opened the door, carrying 2 breakfast sandwiches. She stopped almost immediately. "Were you humming?" "No, Claire. The coffee maker was making a noise." She looked toward the silent machine. "Remarkably melodic appliance. Do you want breakfast or an investigation?" Her grin widened. "Which song?" "I have no idea what you mean." She began humming the exact melody. I gave her my coldest look, which had once been effective. Maya only laughed and reached automatically for the blue mug. I watched her do it and felt that same quiet shift I had been trying not to examine. Later that week, the exchange went the other direction. Maya arrived after work unusually quiet, her smile present but thinner than usual. I did not ask what was wrong. I had learned enough about her to know that questions could sometimes feel like demands. Instead, I put water on for tea, took out the blue mug, and lowered the music. "Long day?" I asked. "Something like that." I placed the tea in front of her and returned to chopping vegetables. 10 minutes passed before Maya spoke again. "Thank you for not making me explain." "You would have explained if you wanted to." She looked at me for a moment. "You are getting annoyingly good at reading me." Occupational hazard of repeated exposure. That earned the real laugh I had been waiting for. Maya stayed for dinner. We barely discussed her day. We did not need to. Later, after she went home, I turned the playlist back on and understood something I was not quite ready to name. I no longer needed Maya to be in the room for her to change the way the room felt. By then, Maya had stopped feeling like a visitor, although I would have denied that if anyone had asked. Visitors waited to be offered a drink. Maya knew where the glasses were. Visitors sat carefully on the edge of the sofa. Maya folded one leg beneath herself, claimed the corner cushion, and complained that I owned too many decorative pillows. "They are not decorative," I told her one evening while slicing tomatoes. "Then what do? They support the room aesthetically." Maya stared at me. "That is the definition of decorative." I pointed the knife toward the cutting board. "You are dangerously close to losing dinner privileges." She laughed and stole a tomato slice anyway. There was something strangely intimate about learning another person through repetition. I learned that Maya preferred tea when she was tired and coffee when she was pretending not to be. She learned that I disliked people talking during movies but apparently tolerated her commentary, which she considered evidence of personal growth. I discovered that she always left the final bite of dessert untouched until the very end. She discovered that I reread the last page of a good novel before putting it away. None of these things were important. That was precisely why they became important. One Saturday afternoon, Maya stretched across my sofa while I read in the chair beside the window. Her playlist played quietly from the speaker. 20 minutes passed without either of us speaking. Once, silence had been the thing I protected most fiercely. I had believed another person inevitably disturbed it. Yet Maya did not disturb mine. Somehow she had entered it. I lowered my book and looked at her. Her eyes were closed, one hand resting loosely over her stomach. "Are you asleep?" I asked. "No," you answered suspiciously quickly. "I am practicing stillness. You are supposed to approve." I smiled despite myself and returned to my book. A few days later, I found my novel on Maya's coffee table, exactly where I had forgotten it. Beside it sat a bottle of the sparkling water I always ordered when we ate together. "You bought that?" I asked. Maya shrugged. "You drink it." Her answer was so simple that I had no response. I had been doing the same thing without noticing. Her blue mug was always clean. I kept strawberries in the refrigerator more often. When she arrived tired, I lowered the music before she asked. When she mentioned skipping lunch one Tuesday, I quietly placed half my dinner into a container and handed it to her before she left. Claire, you do not have to feed me. I know. Then why are you? Because tomorrow you will claim vending machine crackers qualify as lunch. She smiled softer this time. You notice too much. The word stopped me. Months earlier, I might have said the same thing about Maya noticing me. Now the observation belonged to both of us. She took the container and touched my shoulder briefly as she passed. Thank you. The contact lasted perhaps a second. Nothing remarkable happened. Still, after her door closed across the hall, I remained beside mine with my hand on the knob, listening to her footsteps fade into her apartment. Then I looked back at my living room. Her mug on the counter, her music playing softly, one cushion pushed out of place where she had been sitting. My apartment was no longer arranged exactly as I had once preferred it. The surprising part was that I had stopped wanting to put everything back. The change became harder to dismiss when I started noticing how differently I noticed Maya. Not more often exactly. I had been noticing her for months. It was the details that had changed. One Thursday evening, she stood beside me at the kitchen counter, holding her phone between us while insisting that I had misunderstood the lyrics of a song she had added to my playlist. I did not misunderstand them, I said. I simply refused to believe anyone needs 4 minutes to explain one bad decision. Maya laughed. That is practically the entire history of popular music. Then popular music needs better judgment. She moved closer so I could see the screen, and suddenly her shoulder was nearly against mine. I caught the faint clean scent of her shampoo. My attention left the phone for one completely unnecessary second. See, she said, pointing to the lyrics. Right there. I can see it. You are not looking. She was right. I immediately focused on the screen with the concentration of someone reviewing a legal document. Maya glanced at me amused but said nothing. Later that week, another small moment caught me unprepared. We were clearing dinner when we both reached for the same wine glass. Our fingers touched. Neither of us moved immediately. It could not have lasted more than a heartbeat, but I became strangely aware of the refrigerator humming behind us, the music playing softly from the living room, and Maya standing close enough that I could hear her quiet breath. Then she lifted an eyebrow. Are we negotiating custody of the glass? I released it. You may have it. I am generous in my old age. Your old age? Maya repeated. Last Tuesday you spent 15 minutes explaining why you could beat me at trivia. Knowledge accumulates. So does confidence, apparently. The moment dissolved into laughter, which was convenient because laughter required no explanation. A few evenings later, Maya arrived wearing a sweater with one side of the collar folded awkwardly beneath her coat. Without thinking, I reached up and straightened it. My fingers brushed the fabric near her shoulder. Maya went still. So did I. We looked at each other from a distance that suddenly seemed much smaller than it had a second earlier. Her expression was not teasing now. It was simply attentive. Open. I stepped back first. Your collar was crooked. Thank goodness you were here, she said gently. Society narrowly avoided disaster. I rolled my eyes and walked toward the kitchen, hoping movement would restore common sense. I told myself I was merely unused to having someone in my space so often. That explanation worked reasonably well, provided I did not examine it. The truth I was willing to admit was simpler. I knew when Maya was tired before she said so. I knew when her bright laugh was genuine and when she was using it to cover a difficult day. I knew which songs meant she wanted conversation and which meant she wanted company without questions. And increasingly, Maya knew the same things about me. That evening she did not follow me into the kitchen. She stayed by the doorway for a moment, watching me. Claire. Yes. Nothing. She smiled and finally came inside. Somehow, that unfinished word followed me long after she did. The first evening Maya did not come over, I told myself I was relieved. That was the word I chose because it sounded sensible, and sensible had always been one of my favorite disguises. I came home shortly after 6, changed into comfortable clothes, and stood in my kitchen appreciating the rare luxury of having absolutely no one interrupt my routine. I put water on to boil, opened the refrigerator and began preparing pasta. Somewhere along the way, without thinking, I took out enough ingredients for 2 people. I noticed only after I had sliced the tomatoes. Ridiculous, I muttered, returning half of them to the refrigerator. At 7:15, I heard the elevator doors open in the hallway. My knife stopped against the cutting board. Footsteps passed my apartment without slowing. I resumed chopping. At 7:40 I checked my phone supposedly to look at the weather. There were no messages from Maya. Of course there were not. We had never established that she was required to report her whereabouts to me, and the very idea was absurd. By 8 I had eaten dinner and cleaned the kitchen. I should have enjoyed the quiet. Instead, the apartment seemed unusually still. I turned on the television, watched 12 minutes of something I could not remember afterward, then turned it off. That was when I noticed the cup beside the coffee maker. Maya's cup. I had begun thinking of it that way without permission from either of us. White ceramic, dark blue rim, slightly larger than the others. She had chosen it weeks earlier because, according to her, my normal cups were designed for people who feared hydration. I reached for it automatically before stopping myself. There was no reason to make tea for someone who was not there. At 8:30, I heard laughter somewhere outside and glanced toward the door. I disliked how quickly I did it. You are 56 years old, I told myself. You can survive one quiet evening. The apartment offered no argument. That somehow made it worse. I opened the playlist Maya had made for me, choosing one of the songs I had once mocked and now knew well enough to recognize within 3 notes. Music filled the room softly. Months earlier, I had wanted Maya's music turned down. Now I was using it to make her absence less noticeable. That realization landed with uncomfortable precision. I set my phone face down, then turned it over again 5 minutes later. Nothing. I poured sparkling water into a glass and carried it toward the living room. Halfway there, I looked back at the counter. Another glass was already sitting beside the bottle. I had taken out 2. I stood there staring at them as though someone else had arranged the evidence. There was no emergency. No disappointment I had any right to claim. Maya had a job, friends, plans, an entire life that existed perfectly well without crossing my doorway every evening. I knew all of that. Still, at 9:17, when the elevator sounded again, I lowered my book without reading the end of the sentence. Footsteps entered the hallway. This time they slowed. Then came 3 familiar knocks. I was already standing before I realized I had moved. I opened the door so quickly that Maya was still lowering her hand from the 3rd knock. She blinked, then smiled in that quiet way that always made me feel as though she had noticed something I would rather keep private. "Well," she said. That was efficient. I happened to be nearby. Naturally. She stepped inside only after I moved aside, carrying a small paper bag from a bakery several blocks away. "Long day," she explained. "A meeting ran late. Then I stopped for dessert because I felt guilty arriving empty-handed." "You were not expected." The words came out too quickly. Maya looked toward the kitchen. I followed her gaze and immediately saw my mistake. 2 glasses stood on the counter. Beside them sat the covered portion of pasta I had supposedly saved for entirely practical reasons. Maya looked at the glasses, then at me. She did not tease me immediately, which was somehow worse. "Claire." "Maya." Her mouth curved slightly. "Were you waiting for me?" There are questions that become difficult only because the truth is standing visibly behind you on a kitchen counter. I considered denying it. Then the playlist changed songs in the living room, and Maya recognized the opening notes. Her eyebrows rose. "And you are listening to my playlist. Your evidence is circumstantial." 2 glasses. I dislike washing individual dishes. Extra dinner. I dislike wasting food. My playlist. Temporary lapse in judgment. Maya laughed softly. I tried not to smile and failed. Something inside me settled at the sound. That was the part one could not explain away. I had spent the evening insisting I wanted solitude. Yet the moment Maya entered, the apartment felt right again. Not louder. Not invaded. Right. "So," she said, still watching me. "You were not waiting for me?" I looked at the second glass. For once, I could not manufacture a convincing answer. "I may have prepared for the statistical possibility of your arrival." That might be the most Claire Bennett answer imaginable. "Would you like dinner, or would you prefer to criticize my vocabulary?" "Can I do both?" I opened the door wider even though she was already inside. It was an unnecessary gesture, But I remember it because unnecessary gestures had begun telling the truth before I could. Come in, Maya. Her expression softened. I already did. Later, she sat in her usual place while I handed her the white cup with the dark blue rim without asking which one she wanted. Maya noticed. Of course she noticed. She wrapped both hands around it and said nothing. Neither did I. The music continued softly while we shared the dessert she had brought. And I understood one small thing I could no longer deny. Somewhere between her door and mine, Maya had stopped being someone who interrupted my routine. She had become part of it. I did not call it longing. I certainly did not call it love. I only knew that when those familiar knocks finally came, I had already been waiting. Thank you for sharing this chapter with us. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who might enjoy following Claire and Maya as their story continues.